You have to create meaning around the thing that you do. I think the intention separates a lot of people who are just like making stuff for fun. But I feel like if you want to make something that lasts a bit longer, you need to have an intention behind it. You need to have a story to tell.
How does one get better at making music?
Making it every day. I think that's the simplest answer. You just have to practice and practice. You have to want it, you have to want to do it, and you have to do it even when you don't want it. Some days you sit down and nothing comes out. You just realize that that's part of the gig. That's bound to happen. That will happen in the future. It's happened before. There's no need to worry. It just gave me a lot of joy, and it's these few things in life that gives me this, that I can sit down and I forget to eat and I forget to drink and I forget everything. So essentially it's, you get into the flow state and you're just like going.
All right, today I am in the house with Kupla. Kupla, how are you doing?
Hiya, I'm very good, thank you. So, a brief introduction. My name is Kupla. My artist name is Kupla. My real name is Lauri Akte. I'm from Finland originally and from Helsinki. I was born in 1988 in Helsinki. I lived in London, UK for about 8 years between 2012 and 2020. Finished my university degree there, did my master's in sound arts, which was kind of like a philosophy of arts and sound design in the same package. I've been playing the piano since I was a kid. I've been making music on a computer since I was a kid. I've been playing Magic since 1995. Actually, I've started playing piano in 1995 as well. So those are the two things that have kind of traveled with me all these years. And yeah, I'm a professional musician. Nowadays been making music full time for 6 years under the artist name Kupla.
How did you come up with the artist name Kupla?
So back in 2011, I had just met my girlfriend, my current wife, and she told me that she's moving to London. So I had to come up with a plan, what am I going to do? So 2 of my sisters were living in London then as well, and they said, come here to study. So I did. So I took this apartment for 3 months. I paid it in cash, like 3 months in advance, and I prepared for my university portfolio. So it was that sound arts degree. So I'd been composing and making music for several years already then, and I had to come up with a name for the portfolio to the university, and Kupla means a bubble or a sphere in Finnish. So I was doing like Excel spreadsheets of potential names, and Kupla was 5 letters. It kind of sounded cool. It looked all right. So, and it meant like a sphere or a bubble, and I felt like, okay, this is my own bubble. This is my portfolio. I'll name it this way. And then I started a SoundCloud profile under the name, and it wasn't supposed to be like a long project at all. But yeah, then I just ended up not deleting the page, and I just kept on uploading stuff that I was making, and yeah, we're still here 10 years later, more than that.
Very cool. So is there something about the meaning of the sphere or a ball, right? Is there some significance to you in terms of your art, your music, or your personality, or some combination?
So initially so over 10 years ago, before Kupla came to be, I was making music for a long time, and I was always trying to, I guess, please my audience. I didn't have an audience, but I was trying to kind of make stuff that I thought that people would like to listen to. And that led me to, follow the current production trends and maybe kind of try to well, just essentially try to make stuff that people like. But then when I made the portfolio, I made Kupla, I just kind of gave up on that. I figured I'll enjoy making this way more if I just make stuff that I enjoy listening to, and if other people like it as well, it's easier for me to spread the word, essentially. So yeah, I kind of accepted that, okay, this is my own bubble, this is my own sphere, but it doesn't matter because I'm doing this primarily for myself. And yeah, if people come along, then they come along, and that's the significance, the meaning behind it, pretty much.
So that's the tale, or that's the meaning behind it. And you mentioned playing the piano when you were very young, and
Yeah.
how did you start playing music in the first place? Was it your parents that encouraged you? Was it just something natural that you picked up, or what was it?
So I was 7 years old when my mom asked me if I'd like to go to piano lessons. And I've been kind of jamming on the keys at my grandma's house then. So it wasn't a completely unfamiliar environment. So I said, yeah. He wandered in. Yeah, I was 7 years old. My parents asked me if I'd like to go to the piano lessons. They asked my younger sister as well. We both said yes. And there was this kind of like university halls where like music students were living nearby where we lived in Western Helsinki. And they were doing cheap piano lessons. So we went there. I think my younger sister did a few weeks, maybe a month. And I did almost 2 years at that place. And then I applied to, so they recommended, I think it was at the university halls where the piano and the music students, they recommended that I should probably apply to a conservatory. So I was around 9 or 10 years old, and I applied to Pop and Jazz Conservatory in Helsinki. And I got in there, and I went to piano lessons and music theory there for about 5 years, I think. I was about 15 years old when I stopped going to the lessons. And around that time, I was kind of taking my summer job money and investing into like music gear at home and making music on the computer. So I wasn't that interested in acoustic piano then. There were other things like electronic music and composing on the computer that seemed cooler, essentially. I kind of still regret because between 15 and 25, like I had a good 10 years that I wasn't really practicing the piano, but I was practicing music production and electronic music, like just making stuff on the computer. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I picked up, like really, really wanted to learn the piano again. And yeah.
What was it about electronic music or digital music that really appealed to you as a young man?
When we were kids, my older sister, who's 11 years older than me, we used to just stay at home when my parents were away somewhere. And we were watching MTV, music television. So my older sister, she'd lived in London, and she'd always bring home friends from England. And we always had MTV on. And it was The Prodigy that kind of hooked me. I think it was around the time. It was around the time that the Fat of the Land came out. I think 96, 95. So there was like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nirvana, The Prodigy. This was kind of the package that I was really intrigued by. And The Prodigy, just their sounds, they were so different. They were so kind of mean sounding and intriguing. Like my younger sister was 2 years younger than I was. I was 6 or 7. She was 4 or 6 or 5. I don't know. It's just something about the vibe of the, it was quite different from the other stuff that you'd hear. I mean, that was my place to listen to music. Like my dad has a massive classical and jazz music vinyl collection, and we'd listen to that. Like we'd always have classical or jazz playing when I was a kid. But then, you know, when my parents were away and my older sister was looking after us, and we would just like suddenly we'd have like rock and like electronic stuff blasting from MTV, and it was just different. And I felt like instantly like connected to it. Mm. I'm still a massive Prodigy fan. I never went away.
I like the Prodigy as well. Yeah, it's man, the 90s. I like to use every opportunity to talk about how much I love the 90s and how a part of me is still living in the 90s, musically, that is. There was just it was such a crazy time just because there was stuff that was getting airplay, like the Prodigy, that sometimes you look back and you're just like, how are these guys on the radio? Because it's not just the style of music, but also the visual style. Like there's something very, very novel about it. I don't know, like it's just, maybe for you is the Prodigy. For me, it was stuff like Portishead, Massive Attack. Mm-hmm. It was just, there was a lot of stuff back then that was just, even more mainstream stuff like Fatboy Slim or Moby or something like that. There's just a lot of interesting stuff at that time getting airplay. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like almost forgot all the names you mentioned are definitely. I mean, they were more like in the calmer, like down tempo style that I eventually got into myself as well. But those were definitely my favorites as well. All this kind of instrumental.
Prodigy is more the punk of electronic. Yeah.
I think it was the kind of juxtaposing of the smooth jazz and classical that we had playing, and then the Prodigy's like older Prodigy songs that were like Everybody in the Place and all these kind of like early 90s tracks that were just like so different than what I was used to hearing.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, you know, just when you were younger, just making music, perhaps creating beats, or sorry, I'm not a music person. I never made music, so I apologize if I'm using these terms incorrectly. But I'm just curious, like how because I think when you're younger, and whether it's music or other things, there's a tendency to experiment. So how do you, if you look back on that time period, right, between 15 to 20 or 25, like how would you describe what you were doing back then? Like, was there some sort of style? Was there some sort of thing that guided you?
I think it was more about, I think it's the same now. Like I was making way more. I was like, when I started, I was making way more like techno and drum and bass and like quite aggressive electronic stuff. I think that's just to imitate the sounds that I heard from like Prodigy and these kind of acts. But at the same time, I was also making like calmer instrumentals, like just these laid back beats, like really heavily influenced by 90s hip hop. So it was the Prodigy that really got me into like the kind of thinking about music production on a computer when I was a kid. And then around the same time, I really got interested in hip hop as well. So like 90s, like Cypress Hill. So I think this is also part of my older sister giving me Cypress Hill CDs for Christmas when I was 8 years old. And I remember my mom asking, like I was listening to Black Sunday, the album, in my room from my stereo. I was 8 years old and sitting just like listening to hits from the bong. And my mom asking my sister, like, does he know what they're talking about? And I was thinking like, who cares? Like, and it took a few decades, like 10 years, not a few decades, but took about 10 years to really understand where my mom was coming from.
Right.
But they didn't take the CDs off of me. They let me listen to it. I know some friends whose parents have like told them, do not listen to this band or that band. And generally, I don't think that's a good way to raise children.
It kind of reminds me of what Magic the Gathering went through in the 90s, right? Because there was a point in time when I started playing Magic in the 90s, and it was considered to be satanic or demonic at some point. So I guess in the 90s it was games, it was video games. Like there were things that were deemed to be bad influences on children or kids.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
at least in North America. And so it kind of reminded me, what you're saying kind of reminds me of that, where, you know, that was a time where there was maybe more policing. I think there was more about, it was more about like, we need to protect kids from themselves. Whereas now I think, especially post internet, I think it's just completely different now. So
Yeah, no, everything's so
yeah.
everything's so accessible now that, and it's impossible to police and say what can be seen and what can't be seen. It's a better way is to, you know, teach kids their own judgment and, you know, to make them understand. But yeah, absolutely. Like Magic the Gathering, I remember it wasn't a thing in Finland though. Like I think Finland's always been quite liberal in these kind of like in the sense of like when it comes to like religion or things being demonic, or you know, like how unholy strength the magic card, how we got his, it's the pentagram removed and all this stuff. So it's never even a. So when I was growing up in the 90s and playing Magic, you know, none of our parents or our teachers would say anything about the game. It was just a kid's game to them. They didn't think it as a demonic or a bad influence or whatever. If anything, my dad was thinking that it was a good thing to do because we were learning English at the age of 6 and 7 and 8, whereas at school we would have started studying it at the age of 10 or 11. So we were kind of taking a head start for a few years and learning these weird.
Right. There's a kind of educational.
Yeah, and learning these weird phrases. I remember like when I started learning English at 10, we had to write down words that we know that haven't been taught to us at school. And I was writing stuff like creatures and summon and exploration and like magic card stuff. And
You could really expand your vocabulary with Magic. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So you learned Magic when you were that young. When you were, was it 6 years old or 10 years old? What was the?
6 or 7, I think I was. 1994, 1995, around that time. Like between Fallen Empires and Ice Age 4th edition, around that time. Ice Age came, was it like late 95? Yeah, I think around Fallen Empires and 4th edition. That was around the time.
Wow.
I got a big fat stack of commons from my cousin who was 7 years older than me, and they had like power. They had Mox Rubies and Time Walks in their decks, and we were making decks of like Fallen Empires bulk and fourth edition bulk, and got stomped. We were making decks with my other younger cousins who were my age. Like we were 6, 7, and my older cousin was 13, 14, and I think he enjoyed beating our asses in the game.
So it was your cousin or cousins that introduced you to Magic. They gave you is it like a hand-me-downs, or they gave you some cards to get started?
Yeah. So it was my older cousin who first gave his, you know, bulk stuff that he didn't need from the boosters that he opened to his younger brother, who's 1 year older than I am. And then I think we were having like family dinner or something, and then they introduced the game to me and my other cousins, and we were like four cousins. 3 of us were the same age, and then the older one was 7 years older than we were. Actually 5 or 6 years older than we were. But anyway, he was an older guy and playing the guitar and listening to Nirvana, and actually he was making music as well. So that was a big influence in that as well for me. But yeah, we'd spend like family dinners, and sometimes I was, you know, sleeping over at their place, and we'd always play Magic. That was around like 95, 96. And there's just like magical nights, like it's just like evenings that kept on going on and on and on, and
Yes.
we didn't have a time to go to bed, and we'd just play until we couldn't play anymore. With like decks of 120.
Yeah. And
black,
were you playing
random black cards.
without the? Were you playing without the sleeves, or was the Mox Ruby unsleeved, or did you play with
I mean,
sleeves?
they
and
had
protected
sleeves.
cards?
I don't think there were double sleeves around that time. At least I can't remember. But my first set of sleeves I was making, I cut a binder, like a binder that can hold 9 cards on a page. So I cut like the binder pages as my sleeves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was my. But I think they were selling sleeves as far as I can remember at the local card shop. I think we went there around 95, 96. We used to go there with my granddad and my cousins as well. Yeah, they had like big binders of stuff, and we had an allowance to say like, you can have $10 worth of cards you want, and we're like, ah. And I remember looking at the binders and thinking, should I get a Bayou from Revised, or should I get a Nightmare from Revised? And I was contemplating. I got the Nightmare in the end.
Well, the Nightmare is a much cooler card. It's just,
true.
In hindsight, one is more valuable than the other, right?
Yeah.
But
it's a win condition.
You have to go with the Nightmare or the Shivan Dragon. Like, these are great creatures, iconic. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We actually started at a similar time then, because I started in Revised Edition with my brother. Even though I was nowhere near Finland, I was in Canada. But I think it's roughly the same time period. I do remember Fallen Empires and Ice Age and later Mirage Visions fairly well. And it was just, for me, it was just very, very casual Magic. And when I say I live in the 90s, I also really like the 90s of Magic, just because you know this too, right? It's just, there was just so much more mystique about, you don't know what cards are out there. There was no internet, and you play against somebody for ante, and you could win or lose anything, and it was just a crazy time. So
yeah, we never played ante, but the kind of mystique around the cards and sets was definitely there. Like, we'd go to my cousin's summer house in the countryside, and my older cousin somehow got his hands on an InQuest magazine. I don't know if you remember this. InQuest. It's like an old
yes,
Magic
I do.
Yeah,
yes. I remember InQuest and the Duelist. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'd look up cards on InQuest, and they had this like pointing system. So they were giving like 1 to 5 points for each card. So we'd look at the lists, and there are names that we never heard of, and like Arabian Nights and Legends, and anything older than that seemed like impossible to get because the local card shop didn't have any cards from those. And we were looking at the pictures and thinking, ooh, what is this? Library of Alexandria getting 5 stars. Like, we need to get our hands on this one. And no one seemed to know where to get one, and probably like 7-year-old kids couldn't even afford one. But yeah, those were like magical times. And I remember calling up we were playing, and we were thinking, okay, Leviathan, like, this is a cool looking card. Like, I think it was in the InQuest magazine, they had a big picture of it, and it seemed incredible, like this massive blue fish underground swallowing the lighthouse or whatever. And I remember calling up the local card shop and asking, what does Leviathan do? I was 7 years old, and they got angry with me and said, please do not call here again asking these kind of questions.
They're concerned that you're going to call asking about every card. That would have been tough for them to handle the phone call volume.
Yeah, and 7-year-olds are probably not there.
So, other than Nightmare, what were some of your favorite cards from that time period?
I really liked the dual lands. They were kind of like, they were sort of affordable for me to get, like with my weekly or monthly allowance. If I'd saved for a few months, I'd be able to get one. So those were one of my favorites, because I really liked making multicolor decks, but I never really had the dual lands for it. I ended up getting the Bayou eventually. I remember that was my only dual land as a kid, but those were like, my cousin had all the dual lands, and they were like, all his decks were amazing because of that. So those are like my initial first reaction. But I really liked, when I started Magic, I really liked the black cards. Like, my younger cousin had a zombie deck. Well, that's 120 card, just bulk stuff from the early sets. But there was something like Royal Assassin, Sorcerer's Queen, Terror. They seemed so imbalanced. Like, when I was running with like crab worms and like 6 mana, 5/4 vanilla creatures. It's just like someone having a royal assassin that can kill anything I attack with seemed like impossible to beat. And terror, kill anything with 2 mana. Eventually I got a mono white deck together and I got Swords of Plowshares in there, and it's just like, okay, now I can compete. But yeah, definitely those early black cards. I also, Mahamoti Jin, Shivan Dragon, all these kind of classic old cards were on the top of my list.
Mm-hmm.
And they still are. So I recently got into old school, like a couple of years ago. I haven't really been playing old school, but I've been collecting old school cards. And one day I'll probably be able to attend like LobsterCon or whatever, these big old school tournaments one day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's so funny. I mean, blacks. It was and still is my favorite color. You just brought back some memories of when I was playing Royal Assassin, and I was so excited that Icy Manipulator was an Ice Age, because that's a very, very obvious combo, right? And at that point, I was so happy that it felt like an unstoppable combo. There was just something about black cards or black magic that was really, really appealing to me. I mean, I like Mahamoti Jin and Shivan Dragon and that stuff too. And I also remember Fallen Empires had the order of the Aben or Eben hand, and they had the protection from white, and they were really good for 2 mana. And well, at the time they were really good. So and I really enjoyed playing some of the decks back then, for sure.
Yeah. Definitely those cards. Like, I think eventually we got our mono black decks trimmed down to 60 cards because our cousin told us that was the way to do it. That was how they did it in the States and in tournaments. So it's just like Dark Ritual, Hypnotic Spectre, Order of the Even Hand, Terror, Royal Assassin, Icy Manipulator. You mentioned it. I almost forgot about it. Yeah, that was a nasty combo. Yeah. But it's funny, like, when you're building old school decks nowadays, like, these kind of the same cards are there and they're good, which is why I kind of fell in love with the format.
Yeah, it's an older format. You can only use is it like 93, 94? Is that I had never played old school, so is it similar to that where you can only play cards from the very earlier editions of Magic sets?
Yeah. So I mean, I got interested in the format 2 years ago. I haven't played a game of old school yet, but I've been collecting the cards. I'm a big player of Legacy, and pre-modern somewhat. But yeah, old school is a format that I've been meaning to get into. So I've been collecting some of the cards for it for 2 years now, and slowly getting a deck together. It's expensive as hell, which is kind of sad. I mean, but so is Legacy, so is all these old formats. They are. But
what is it about these older formats that appeal to you, right? Like, because I think when we met in, I think it was London.
GP London.
We were playing a Legacy event, and so you seem to be drawn to these older Eternal formats. So what is it exactly about these older formats?
Well, initially it was like I was playing Magic between 94, 95, all the way up until after Invasion. So I think 2001, when I stopped playing for almost 9 years. And then 2010, I got back into the game. I was playing a casual game of Magic at my friend's house, and I was thinking, like, damn, it's been 10 years, and I used to play this every day. So I started looking online, like I found Card Kingdom, and at first I didn't even know that there were these formats in 2010. So I was just buying cards that I enjoyed. I was buying like Royal Assassins and Explorations and all these like older cards that I really enjoyed back in the day. And then I found that there's actually a format called Legacy. And it was, you could play with dual lands, you could play with Force of Will, you could play these older cards that were good then, and they're good in this kind of fresh format that everyone seems to be playing as well. I didn't like Standard because I wasn't I didn't want to make a deck that will rotate out in a year and a half. Like I wanted to make a deck that I could, use after several years. So yeah, the nostalgia, the older cards that were good when we were kids, they were suddenly good when we were adults. And now, yeah, it's been 13 plus years since I put my first order on Card Kingdom in 2010, and still playing, and yeah, not planning on quitting ever again.
For me as well. What is it about Magic though? I mean, is there something that you can call out? Like, is there something about the aesthetics of Magic, the gameplay, the visuals, the flavor of these things? Which ones do you think are the most attractive to you, or the ones that have the most appeal to you?
I think the mana symbols are what kind of instantly come to my mind. It's just I remember just staring at the mana symbols on the cards, and it gives me the same kind of excitement and nostalgia still today when I look at them. And then it's just about them. Like I've always been I've enjoyed doing maths at school, and it's this kind of calculating things and, kind of planning your turns ahead and thinking about what my opponent will do. And this kind of, I think it's just the whole environment within a game is very appealing to me. And it was as a kid as well. Like as a kid, I was always thinking several turns ahead. Okay, what's my what my sequence will be? What's my game plan? I have these cards. I'm going to play this, and then if they play this, I'm going to play this or this. And this sort of planning the entire game felt really, really nice. And then the maths kind of involved in that as well. But yeah, the mana symbols are like particularly nostalgic, especially the older ones, the older versions of the mana symbols.
I want to get back to your music. This is an area that I'm really, really fascinated by, and because you mentioned that in naming your or having an artist named Kupla, you were trying to do things, you're creating for yourself, right? So how did you take that journey to? I assume you're a full-time artist now. So how did you make that step? Like what kind of things happened around you as you were releasing music, or what was your journey like? When I guess it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Like, describe that journey, how you became who you are now, basically musically.
Yeah, so I think since I was 16, I was kind of dreaming about making music full time. But around that time, I think YouTube wasn't there. There was none of these streaming platforms. The kind of infrastructure, digital infrastructure around this wasn't existing yet. So yeah, about 10 years ago, when I was moving to London, I thought, okay, maybe this, like studying sound arts, this will probably, I'll make connections within the kind of sound world and music industry. I wasn't thinking of making it like making my own music. I was more kind of planning to do any kind of studio work, whether it's recording or just like running recording sessions or this sort of stuff. So whilst I was studying, I met this Chinese guy called Howie Lee, who was from Beijing. He's one of the kind of pioneers within the kind of Chinese electronic music scene, and he's a couple of years older than I was, and he was already doing music full time. And I was really like, he was kind of mentoring me into, okay, you should do this, you should release your stuff. And I wasn't releasing anything back then, so he was saying, okay, this is good, why don't you release this? And he was helping me kind of push it forward. And he knew some people in London who were running record labels, and we'd go have drinks with them. And I wasn't fully committed yet then, but I was kind of observing from the sidelines. Okay, what are these guys doing? So, but from him, he kind of pushed me to release my stuff. That was kind of the first step. Like, you can't do anything if you don't release. If you don't have a portfolio of music, you have to release music. So he really helped me into understanding that. And then through the university, I got involved in this. I got into this program that we were making music for dance productions, like the dance theater. And I got really involved and really enjoyed that. So I was working with a couple of choreographers on a few productions, and I was making like ambient stuff for the background and some beats. And around that time, I was thinking, okay, maybe this is it. Like this is the thing I want to do. I want to push this theater, music, dance production stuff forward. And I was doing that for a while, but in the end, I was still, like, it always happened. So I would come back home from rehearsals or from work or whatever, and I'd start making music that whatever my mindset was in at that moment. So I would start improvising. I would start recording my piano things, my experimenting with synths and melodies, and making beats that I kind of liked listening to. And I just started releasing stuff at first as often as I could. You know, I was working full time, so there wasn't that much time to do it. But after a few releases, I think I did my first release in 2014, like the official kind of EP release with a record label. And then I did probably like an EP of 6 tracks or so every year. And in 2017, so 3 years later, I released this album called In the Forest We're Wizards, which is, you can kind of guess where that name comes from. It was kind of the tied nostalgia to, you know, childhood memories of just running in the forest, as well as, you know, playing Magic, and it just felt really fitting. But anyway, I released that EP. At that time, I had already landed a job in my field, so I was working in a kind of recording studio environment, doing like voiceover stuff, but still it was in the audio realm and not in a warehouse where I was working previously. But yeah, after that release, it somehow picked up steam on Spotify. It got into like one of the opening track within like 2 months, got on the Spotify viral top 50 charts. Like, it was charting, and I had maybe 10,000 streams on all my tracks combined together back then, and suddenly one of these tracks was making that amount in a day, like essentially doubling the streams I had every day. So I was thinking, okay, there's something here. And then at that time I was always like, I saved up all the money that I was earning from the job as well. I was thinking, okay, if there's ever a time to save up money up front for rent and food and everything, like, now is the time. This album is picking up steam. Let's see where this goes. And 6 months later, it was racking up more streams than ever before. And I started making as much as I was making from the day job in the recording studio from that album, essentially. So I was thinking, okay, I have 18 months of rent saved up. This album is making me more money than my day job. So I'm going to see 1 or 2 more months what happens. I'm preparing for another EP, and around that time several like chill hop music and Chilled Cow around, and that time Now Lo-Fi Girl, those kind of like bigger record labels in that instrumental hip hop chill hop scene, where they were contacting me and saying, okay, we've heard this new album that you made, is there anything you want to send our way? So I started communicating with these guys, and through them I met a lot of other producers in Europe online. We were chatting, we were making like groups and talking about music in general, how to release music, what distributors. So you use a distributor to distribute music to Spotify as a freelance artist or as a self-employed. So you don't have to have a record label. You can release your stuff, self-release your stuff there. You just need a distributor. So we're talking about how to use these things and what kind of what you need. But yeah, that was the kickstart. And then I started working with the labels, and I kind of took the conscious decision, okay, I have 18 months of rent saved up. Even if it goes to zero now, I have a little bit over a year that I can travel and meet these people face to face. So I went to Rotterdam, to Chill Hop Music's offices, met a lot of other like-minded producers there. And yeah, I wanted to travel Europe and meet these people and form connections. And I was thinking, okay, if we're all doing this now, this will probably go somewhere. So yeah, then that was kind of the formula. And for the past 5 years, that's pretty much been the formula. Well, COVID happened and wasn't allowed to travel, which is a shame. And then family happened and all these things. So, but, at least the groundwork was laid around that time by traveling, meeting people face to face. I think that was the major point, to know these people, who they are in real life. It's way better to keep up with the communication and have that relationship going when you know them in person.
When you look back at your biggest hit, the one that blew up on Spotify, the one that catapulted you into believing that maybe this could be a career, is there something about that track that, if you look back on it objectively, like, is there some sort of secret to that? Like, have you thought about, or have you figured out why it went viral on Spotify? Like, why it was such a big hit? I mean, arguably that's the biggest thing you've ever done, right? So what's the story behind that? Have you thought about it?
It's hard to kind of pinpoint one thing. I think it was a combination of things I learned when I was studying sound arts, to kind of have a signature thing that no one else is doing. So I was recording a lot of stuff acoustically, like keys rattling. So the track I'm talking about is Emerald, the opening track from In the Forest Were Wizards. But there's a lot of acoustic, like really fine details that aren't necessarily the meat of the track. But there's like me like handling keys, and it's sort of like this ASMR vibe that really kind of makes you relaxed. And I was also recording myself like inhaling and exhaling, like these sort of like tiny elements that, I don't know, if you're not listening to it carefully, you might not even hear them. But a lot of people have told me that they've listened to my tracks 20 times and they're always hearing something different or something new in them. So I think that's part of the appeal, and what I also
especially with good headphones, that's important.
Yeah. So I'm always trying to add fine details and add these layers of sound that can't be replicated, and even I can't replicate them because they're a one-off thing in that moment. Just like touching whatever things I have available or collected from outside, and just like seeing what kind of sounds they make, and then putting those in the track. Yeah, they can create really interesting atmospheres, and like this fingerprint of a sound that can't be really. But yeah, acoustic recordings, those are essential.
I want to know, how does one, this is going to sound like a very simple or reductive question, but how does one get better at making music?
Making it every day. I think that's the simplest answer. You just have to practice and practice. It's the same with anything, really. You have to want it. You have to want to do it. And you have to do it even when you don't want it. I think that's my recipe. So essentially, I try to sit down every day and make something. Even when I'm not feeling like it, I just want to sit down and get it out of the way. I think Ed Sheeran said in one interview once that the creativity is like a tap that sometimes like rusty water comes out, but you have to let it out, otherwise the clear water won't come. So I think it's very on point. That's exactly how it feels like. Some days you sit down and nothing comes out. Even like you might feel like, okay, this is the day, today we're making something great. And you sit down and you have the most amazing vibe to record and jam and play, and then you hit record and it's just not quite hitting the mark. And you can't really pinpoint what it is, because the feeling you had going into the session was great, like everything was aligned to make something brilliant. but then nothing comes out, and it can be really frustrating. And the more you do it, the more you sit down every day, you just realize that that's part of the gig. That's bound to happen. That will happen in the future. It's happened before. There's no need to worry. You just work as long as you can, hopefully at least a couple of hours, just to see, because sometimes it could be after 45 minutes, you take a little break, you have a cup of coffee, you come back, and then something great comes out suddenly, unexpectedly. But yeah, you just have to sit down and put in the hours, really. Obviously it helps, like when you're studying, like practicing instruments, if you're just playing the same 4-chord song year after year, you're not improving, you're just playing the same thing. So you have to consciously put yourself out of your comfort zone and try something hard, something you can't do, and that's really rewarding. Like I've get into these phases of rehearsing the same things that I know I can do and feeling great about it, but it gets boring after a while, and then you want to try something harder. But you don't want to practice or try something too hard that you absolutely have no idea how to do. So you have to find a great balance where you can learn and kind of, it's hard enough that you have to really try, but it's not that hard that you can't do it at all. And then that you raise the bar of where your skill level is, and it gets higher and higher, and you don't feel like progressing. You don't feel like you're progressing, or you don't feel like you're learning anything really. But then when you look back, like 2 years back, where you were then, you realize, okay, actually, a lot of things have happened here. I've learned this and this. And so yeah, it's like going to the gym. It's horrible at first, but if you just keep on going there, it gets easier. Same with any kind of sports, really, or any kind of job, really, I think. As amazing as it is making music full time, it is your full-time job as well. So it's not, you have those days when it's mundane and you don't feel like doing it. But, it's my choice. I wouldn't have anything differently. So, and, can't really complain when you can do that stuff. So there are days that aren't that great, but then there are days that are really good. So
I think have you heard about the rule of thirds? I recently just heard about it. It's just about work in general, but I feel like it can apply to a lot of different disciplines. It's basically like saying that you should expect, if you're doing something challenging and fulfilling, that a third of the time you're going to feel really bad. A third of the time you're going to feel really great. And the other third of the time you're going to feel just pretty mediocre or average. And for me, that was kind of a wake-up call, right? Because if every day is really bad, then you're probably burning out. If every day is really good or fine, that means you're probably not challenging yourself enough. So it's just something that I heard recently or read about recently that really resonated with me. I not just for music, I think, because I don't make music, but I feel like it's I don't know how you feel about that. I think there's something universal about that, where some days are just not great and some days are better, and you don't really have an awful lot of control over that. It's just, you just have to expect, or you have to accept maybe that happens.
absolutely, yeah. I think those are wise words. Because, if every day is just brilliant and great, where's the contrast? How do you know then you're raising the bar of what's great for you mentally? And then if you're constantly there, it becomes your normal. So you need to have these ups and downs. You need to have the diversity in order to, separate the highs from the lows.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just riding that train up and down is you just have to. It helps if you can calm your mind and you can be like observant of your mental state and where you are on that train ride at the moment. Because when you can pinpoint the low moments and the high moments, you can appreciate them more, and you know that, okay, this low point won't last forever, and you know, same for the high moments, that they won't last forever, but you can at least appreciate them and kind of live in the moment a little bit more. Yeah, so it's a lot of kind of fine-tuning your mental state into, you know, as you said, you can't predict what's going to happen. It's out of your control. So what's in your control, you know, focus on that. How many hours a day you're sitting down and training, practicing. What's your intention? What do you want to accomplish? What's your goals? All these things are important. Nothing will ever go as planned. But if you don't have a set of goals or a trajectory, nothing will happen either. So you have to try, and you have to kind of think about those goals and that trajectory. Sometimes you have to, you know, adjust course. But if you keep those in mind, then the lows and the highs, you know, they become part of the journey. And yeah, as simple as that.
I want to know though, how did you keep that motivation when times were tough? Because I never think of art or any kind of craft as a straight line. For you, how did you? It's great you told me your philosophy or the way you handle it, right? But how do you deal with it during the toughest times? How do you keep your motivation? Maybe is a better question.
Yeah, so I think I accepted several times whilst I was making music after a long day at work. Like back in London, I'd take the tube, the metro, to work, like 1 hour and 20 minutes one way, and then spend 8 to 9 hours there, and then another hour and a half back home, make some dinner. You know, the day is essentially over at that point. So how do you have the energy to sit down and make music that's not guaranteed to take you anywhere? I guess it's just I felt like I have to do it. It was something I enjoyed so much doing that even when I didn't feel like doing it, I wanted to do it. In a sense that I accepted that I will do this for the rest of my life, even if I'm working 12-hour shifts in a day job that isn't necessarily for me. I would still make music just because it's just something I feel like I have to do. I can't remember. I listened to a podcast a while back where this author, they asked like, well, how do you come up with the writing? And it's very similar to music. And I can't remember the name of the author now, but he said that it's like a compulsion, that you don't become an author if you want to become an author. There's no choice. You just do it, and you accept that I will do this even if it never, you know, even if it doesn't become my job, I will still do this every day. So I don't know, at times there were no motivation, but it's just getting better at production, and it's just gave me a lot of joy. And it's these few things in life that gives me this, that I can sit down and I forget to eat and I forget to drink and I forget everything. So essentially it's, you get into the flow state and you're just like going, and when you come out of it,
Yeah.
it's like you're coming back home from a trip. It's just like, you're like, what happened? Like suddenly you're like, so many things went through your head and you're not even like processing it. And the best part is like, when you're not even doing the work, you're just like automatically, you're just observing your hands do the movements and tweaking things, but that takes time to get into it takes practice to get into the kind of state where you can just like automatically create stuff. It takes hours and hours and hours of practice before it becomes automatic. But at first, it was fun.
Yeah.
It was a fun hobby. Then it became something much more, an obsession. and kind of a lifestyle, I think.
Well, it's like the podcast that you listen to, like it says, it's almost like it chooses you, right? It's in a lot of ways you're not choosing music. Music chose you. Like you, it's if it's an obsession or if it's a compulsion, you're almost what's the word? Obliged to follow it
Yeah,
because I don't know, maybe this sounds a little bit silly, but sometimes I feel like when I'm doing a podcast, like when I'm doing this kind of thing, that's like the most fun I have, right? Like I'm literally doing this interview with you. It's 9 p.m. I had a 12-hour workday before this for the day, and I like my job, and I think I'm decent at it. But this is a whole nother thing that I just like. I'm just doing this for free, right? I'm not doing this to get to get paid. It's just and there's been times where I've actually been in a flow state during a conversation, and it's or sometimes when I used to do more writing, like it was just actual writing. It was on a keyboard, and it's just it's those moments that make you come back, or at least for me, because I want to chase that possibility that I can get to that place, even though 99 times out of 100 interviews, that's not going to happen. But there's just something, you know what I mean, right? It's just something that you're always chasing that, or it becomes a part of you. Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like it kind of extends time in a weird way. Like say that an hour or even just 20 minutes in the flow state can feel like hours, and that's what I don't know. It just kind of feels like you're cleaning up your brain, like you're getting this interesting like time dilation effect happening where you kind of suddenly wake up and you're like, whoa, what was that? And it can, you know, you carry it with you for a while, that when you reach that feeling. And I think that's the kind of what, yeah, what you strive for.
What I want to know is, you mentioned consistency and challenging yourself, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm still curious about what separates Kupla from somebody that, you know, has played music for 5,000 days in a row, and maybe they are challenging themselves. They're learning new songs or they're learning new techniques. They're trying to level up a bit. But is there something that still separates you from someone who is maybe doing that and sort of plateauing, right, from a performance perspective? How I guess another way to ask the question is, if we assume that you grow by pushing yourself in the right ways, how do you know how much to push and how much to rest?
I guess it comes to your how much pain are you ready to endure, because growing and learning is quite painful, and you have to accept that it's not easy, and you have to be able to kind of push through it regardless. I feel like my pain tolerance is really high. I'm quite systematic in how I plan things and how I want to get things done. And if it means sacrificing things that are, you know, pleasurable in the near term, I can push those aside. I wasn't always like that. I feel like this job taught me how to do this. I have to, because you have to plan for the future. That's how this whole industry works, essentially. Like you release a track today and you won't see a dime until 3 months later. So that's essentially the first bit, kind of, if you're thinking about like, you know, paying rent and this sort of stuff. You have to plan ahead, hope like ideally years ahead. So that means that any kind of instant gratification goes out the window. You have to plan for things and set up your daily routines in a way that they carry you for years. And yeah, you know, some people just don't like that kind of rigidness of their. I'm kind of like, my everyday is pretty much the same essentially. Like that's how I feel like I work the best in that sense. So wake up at the same time, do the same things at the same time. It's kind of like the Groundhog's Day, but that's how you get things done. Like you do the same things over and over and day after day, and then suddenly you look back and you're like, okay, I've consistently been doing this, and we've built up into this what we are now. So that's the way. What the first question was, what separates from the person who's been making music for 5,000 years, 5,000 days in a row? I think,
Yeah.
I think the intention has to be there. So if you have to have some kind of inner dialogue of where you want to go, and what is it? What are the intentions? What is the meaning of what you're doing? Like when I was 14 or 15, just around those times when I stopped going to piano classes, that's the moments where I really started to question what's the point, like what's the reason. I was basically practicing because my piano teacher wanted me to practice, and we might have like one show a year where we were playing to the parents of the students in the conservatory, and that was like the thing to look forward to that I hated. I didn't like performing live there, and I think that's the reason why I stopped going as well. It's because the expectations were coming from somewhere else. I was practicing because I felt like I had to please the piano teacher or whatever. But yeah, it's like you have to create meaning around the thing that you do, and ideally from your daily life, ideally from your experiences, you have to have some kind of connection. How do you channel those emotions, and how do you channel those feelings and experiences that you've had into something else? I think the intention separates a lot of people who are just like making stuff for fun. Like obviously everyone starts making stuff because they enjoy doing it. But I feel like if you want to make something that lasts a bit longer, you need to have an intention behind it. You need to have a story to tell. And it's not easy always. Like sometimes sometimes I'd make a song and it would sound great, but if you don't have a story attached to it, it might seem a bit hollow. And sometimes it happens that the story comes later. You create something you really nailed the vibe here. You got the emotions just right, and the structure and everything is perfect. But the kind of intention and the story isn't there just yet. So it's funny, like I'd say 50% of the time I work backwards like that. So just improvising and recording stuff and putting things together that sound good, but it doesn't feel like a whole. And then maybe months later something happens and I'm thinking, okay, this thing that happened fits here. I mean, it's funny. Sometimes it's just something happens and you create music into that. It's the other way to do it. I feel like that's the quicker way to do it. But you have to have you have to be able to explain what is here.
Are you saying that sometimes your life just like music is just sometimes part of it is your life, so sometimes something just happens and then you're just connecting and then you go back? Did I understand what you're saying correctly?
Yeah.
Like there's almost like just something sparks. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Something like it can be as simple as a walk in the woods, seeing a deer, just observing them and seeing how they react to you and how they look around, and it can trigger this state of mind where or this state of wonder. I feel like it's what triggers me the most, is this kind of like wondering how they got here, wondering how they function, what they might be thinking about, how this thing even works that we call life. But yeah, to me, I feel like this kind of wonder is what sparks it oftentimes. And then there's things like, you know, someone close to you passing away, or these kind of things that trigger really big emotions that can act as a trigger as well. But in general, if there's like a grey day where you don't feel like, well, actually, I mean, even on those days, something really good can come out. Because when you're, well, like, how I make music is essentially it's 90% improvisation. So I sit down, I take whatever instrument I have at hand, piano, clarinet, flutes, melodica, guitars, whatever I feel like, okay, I'm just going to jam on this one. And you start playing and improvising, and then that improvisation gets you into a state of mind. Maybe it's sort of like therapy. So you're unconsciously, at least, going through these things. And then it can channel into a melody or a chord sequence. And sometimes, yeah, as I said, like attaching the story to the track later. Like it can, because sometimes it happens so quickly sometimes that you can play something and it instantly sounds good, and you're just working on it. And you're not even really focusing on the intention or the meaning that much right there and then, but there is something behind there. It's coming from somewhere. So then just pinpointing that. And a tangent, I just feel like whenever making music, the quicker it comes out, the better it usually is. So if there's a track that you've been working on for 3 days, and it just feels like it's not going anywhere, those are the kind of tracks that rarely get released. But instead, if you're sitting down and 90 minutes later you have a whole track, that's usually a really good sign that you entered the flow state and it just came out.
Are there tracks that you've honestly don't know? Like, it was probably different for every artist, but how much of your finished or nearly completed works do you actually release? Is it like, are you fairly certain by the time that it's done, because of what you described, the circumstances in which it came out? Did it come out fast? Did it come out slow? I guess the way to ask the question is, how much of your catalog that you've worked on do you actually release? Do you release a lot of it? Do you scrap a lot of it? What's your process?
I scrap most of it. I'd say, to give out a figure, I'd say I probably release about 20% of the material that I release. Maybe 25% nowadays. It's been growing a little bit. Like earlier years, I would make hours and hours on end of stuff that never comes out. Like before, I would say that maybe 10% of the songs, like 1 in 10 songs that I create, I'd probably release. So for an album of 10 tracks, I might have made 100 songs. But nowadays, it's not as much. I'd say for an album of 10 songs, I'd probably make around 40 songs nowadays. Sometimes even as little as 30. But still, majority of the stuff gets scrapped, and that it's a conscious choice to leave most of it out. So you can choose songs that fit together when they're played after one another. Sometimes I take out a song even though it's perfectly fine and I really enjoy it, but it's just because it doesn't fit anywhere in the release. So then it might be released later on a later album, or as in a compilation through a label. But at least, it gives me more wiggle room, in the sense that I have kind of a catalog of tracks. If, say, a label approaches me and say, we are doing this compilation album in the theme of falling leaves in the autumn, could you submit a few tracks for consideration? And I can instantly reply to that email and say, here's 3 tracks. So I don't have to make anything from scratch at that point. So I can just say, I have hundreds and hundreds of tracks that, could be released, but just I haven't released.
When you make the tracks, are you making it for somebody else? Are you making it for yourself? Is it important that somebody listens to it as opposed to just yourself?
I think it's important. Primarily, I make it so that I enjoy it and I get a good feeling out of it. But essentially, that good feeling that I get out from it, when people enjoy it, other people enjoy it, and tell me that they've enjoyed this song, it amplifies the great feeling that I get from making the track as well. So, yeah, like when Kupla started in 2011, 2012, and that was the reason to just make stuff for myself. But, back then no one was listening to this stuff, so I wasn't aware of how it would make me feel. But it definitely amplifies the good feeling. So yeah, whenever I'm making a song and I really enjoy it, I'm also hopeful that other people will like it as well and listen to it. But at the same time, if they don't, at least I can listen to it. It's out of my it's out of my control, really.
I guess what I'm wondering is like, is there some sort of musical equivalent of a private journal or a private diary? You know how sometimes I write things for public consumption. I put it in a newsletter or a blog or on Twitter or wherever, a crazy place that's external. But sometimes you're writing things just for yourself. Is there such a thing for you when it comes to music, or is that just completely separate from the Kupla work?
So I have these kind of side projects that I haven't released. So I've made like classical music with just piano and clarinet that I've been meaning to release for a long time, but I haven't, and I listen to it weekly, that release. So I have about 10 tracks of this kind of film music-ish material. It's quite emotional, and I really enjoy listening to it, but I haven't found the time or the place to kind of put it out just yet. It will come out at some point for sure, but that's something that could fit that category. And also, like, thinking about journaling. So all my projects I can put them in chronological order, like from the save dates on my computer and on my hard drives. So it's funny, like I was just listening to an old song that I made, say 2016 or 2015 October, and I can't pinpoint what I did in October in 2015. But when I open up that track and I listen to it, I remember exactly the room I made it in and what was happening that day. Maybe not necessarily exactly that day, but at least I remember that feeling I had and what was going on in my life that day. So it's like, even though there are no words written down, right, I can still remember like every song that I've made. When I listen back to it, it kind of transports me back in time into that moment when it was created, and into that room and into that apartment. And it's especially like vivid when we were living in London and we were moving houses like every 9 months or so. It's kind of weird in a sense. Like, if my wife asked me, like, do you remember the years we were living in this and this flat? And I was thinking, I'm not sure what were the dates. But then when I listen to a track that I made in that apartment, it instantly takes me back there, and I can check the time, the date saved for that project. Okay, yeah, it was around this time. It's a really strange feeling.
Right. It's like a really specific time machine that only works in one vector. Like, and even though I'm not an artist or a musician, I do have a sense of what you mean, because when I listen to just music in general, it just takes you back, right? Even if I haven't created that track, like I'll listen to the Smashing Pumpkins, from the 90s. I'll listen to a track. I was listening to, what was the track? Mayonnaise, like the other day.
Yeah,
and it just takes me back to when I was 10 years old or 15 years old, it's just magical, right? It's
Yeah.
just that's honestly one of the greatest gifts that music has given us, humankind, is that teleportation, time machine
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I was listening to Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins, the album, just like 2 days ago, and it just takes me to this very particular moment in my childhood where I had this CD player, this Iowa CD player that kept on like skipping when it was shaked. But I was observing my cousins play tennis, and I was just sitting next to the where they were playing on this bench and just listening to it on a summer day. Yeah, it's a great album, by the way. But yeah, it's an interesting feeling, and it does work for me with all kinds of music.
Yeah.
It's just like I remember the day I heard it for the first time, and I remember the days when I connected with it in a more like deeper emotional level, and what's happened. You know, so many memories attached to this. It's like, for me at least, I feel like music is the strongest trigger. But smell is also, I think I read it on a science magazine somewhere, that smell, the sense of smell, is also a very like kind of nostalgic time and place triggering sense. So when you smell, like I remember there was this old transport museum somewhere in central Finland that we used to go to maybe twice a year. And they had this old bus from the 1950s. And I just remember the smell of the benches in the bus, like this old like leather seat smell, and I'd forgotten about that experience completely, and I smelled the same smell like a year ago somewhere. I don't know if it was even real, or maybe was it like a hallucination, because I don't know where that smell came from. But it's just like popped into my head, and I smelled it in my nose, and just like the smell of the 1950s old bus in that transport museum, like almost 25 years ago. Like how weird that it came into my mind. But yeah, same like if you have your like a cologne that your dad used to use, or you know, any kind of smell, it can really take you back.
For me, it's kind of, that's the magic of magic cards, pun intended, right? Because magic cards have the smell, but they also take me back to when I was playing at that time, right? And so for me, the eternal formats are, even though it's in a completely different context now, right? It's in a completely different deck, but just the memories of a specific card or specific image or something, like I would like play a magic card and it would remind me of when I was reading about it in InQuest magazine, and it would also remind me of when I was trying to buy that card in a store in the 90s or 2000s. And there's those connections are really interesting. The some of the analog things in life, they really take me back. And I try not to be too nostalgic, because I think it's also kind of weird if you're constantly living in the past, because I think life is about progress and moving forward and growing. But I like once in a while to be able to go back to that, and there's just some sort of comfort in that, because for me it's also combined with some history of accomplishment, of things that I have done in the past, people I've met, and that's something that I guess it's just a really long way to say I love things that are time capsules that can take me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know, it's just yeah, kind of the balance between the nostalgia and thinking for the future. But I feel like it's how I think about nostalgia right now. It's like having a kid now. He's 1.5 years. I'd like to provide an environment that he can be nostalgic about in the future, as I'm nostalgic about my childhood. I think that's something that's feels like a circle kind of coming to an end and then another one starting. It's It's a strange feeling.
Yeah. What's what is it like to be a father?
There's so many things attached to it. So yeah, we had our firstborn son exactly 1.5 years ago. Completely, well, I mean, it was expected and wanted and everything, but still completely unprepared. I don't think anyone can be prepared. After the first phases of lack of sleep and staying up every day and every night, it kind of, well, he grows with you, he learns things from you, and it happens so quickly. And you feel like you're not, I mean, obviously you are growing as well, but they're growing so much quicker. And it's just thrilling to watch what he comes up with, because he's a completely different person. And yeah, I really enjoy it. Like I work from home. I have the luxury of being here every day as well. So at first I didn't like it because of the lack of sleep, because I'm a big sleeper. I enjoy my rest, and that was taken away. So I was quite grumpy and quite irritated for several months. But with like good planning and good planning and him getting older and eventually sleeping better, it's kind of like grown into me that I really enjoy it. Yeah, I think it's a thing that it evolves constantly, like being a father, being a dad. You have to appreciate every moment, I think, and you have to also consciously think about what kind of example do you want to get. So that's, you're improving yourself because you want to be the best possible example. So having the kind of calm and so I mean, I'm kind of naturally quite calm, but not always. So it's taught me a lot of patience, even though I'm quite patient already. But with a toddler, you can never have enough patience. So, but yeah, it's
Yes.
it's like
Kids
the same
can test your patience.
exactly,
Yes.
and it's like the same roller coaster as it with the creative process and the kind of any job and just life in general. You have your ups and you have your downs, and it's just being aware enough to understand when the good moments are and when the bad moments are, and how none of those last forever.
Has being a father affected your music? How has it changed the way you approach music or your sound or anything like that?
Well, the most obvious thing is that the schedule is even more rigid than it was before. So I can't just make stuff whenever I feel like it. I have other things that I have to put first in my life, and that's not the music. That's the kid. So yeah, times of day when he's asleep, that's the times when I can focus most on making music. So that's the kind of practical side of it. The more emotional side of it is there's so many new emotions that have come with being a father, and surprisingly enough, they do come into the music. So one example would be the song Rituals. That was on the most recent album released in February 2023. So I was, when the baby was not sleeping well, I composed this lullaby on a kalimba, which is like this finger piano. So I initially composed it to kind of calm him down, and it wasn't really working. I thought about the track. I thought it was really like sleep-inducing and nice, but it just didn't work. But I made it anyway, and I played it a few times, and I realized that it's not what he wants. But I really liked the melody. I really enjoyed the track. So I had to record it, and I had to kind of create a song out of it, and that's Rituals. Which is kind of the name even like implies to like when talking about the meaning and the story behind. So rituals, it's kind of the daily rituals for me, like getting up, doing these family things. Also magic, dark rituals, but the family rituals aren't that dark, luckily.
How do you feel about Spotify, music platforms like Spotify? I think you and I both come from a world where music was not discovered or produced or discovered that way. Obviously, Spotify had a huge influence or impact on you as a musician, as a creator. But do you have any overall thoughts about platforms like Spotify?
I think they're reaching a point where it's the most convenient way to consume music. When it comes to the monetization and how different, like how artists or like rights holders are compensated, I think there's still a lot of room for improvements. But in terms of ease of access, it's like when you think about like when we were growing up as well, it was like radio, maybe like C cassettes, vinyls, CDs, then maybe later mini discs. When you compare music streaming to these like kind of rigid and like these physical formats, it's so much more convenient in my opinion. Spotify's sound quality is not great in my opinion. There are better options for that if you're like an audio nerd and you want to get the best sound quality out of everything. That's something that they could improve upon. But in terms of usability, I feel like we are reaching a point where it's harder to find innovations to find something that's more convenient and more fitting for the everyday user, me included. Like it's so easy to just turn on Spotify and just whenever you're driving or on your phone or having your headphones, it's just, we've been like with my music friends, we've been talking about this quite a lot, that some of them feel like music streaming killed music, but I feel like it didn't. It kind of did the opposite. It brought it to every moment. Maybe it made it less special in a sense that it's always accessible, but I feel like the internet did that to many things. To your attention, from your attention span to like games to films, and you browse Netflix and there's a million things to watch, and you browse it for half an hour and you can decide what to do and then you just turn it off. So this is the kind of like you have so many different choices that whereas previously you turn on music television and there's the Prodigy playing and that's what you'd listen to, and there's nothing else, or the radio, like
2 channels or 3 channels.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to, it's good and bad. You have to consciously, I mean, it will be for kids like growing up into this world. Like I feel like we are kind of lucky in the sense that we experienced both worlds. Like when we were kids, we didn't have the internet in the sense it is now. Like there was internet was kind of coming up, but it didn't have everything at any given moment. So you have to be able to live in the moment and not think about all the possible options that you could be doing or could be listening or could be watching, or, you know, you have to ground yourself consciously more nowadays than then. But overall, I feel like for me personally, I wouldn't change music streaming into any other things. Like, I enjoy listening music on vinyl, and I have a lot of vinyls, but most of the time I still choose Spotify just because of the convenience of it.
What are your thoughts about this this sort of technology driven or AI driven type of making art or making music? I think there's been some recent quite prolific examples of this, right? Where I guess mashups is one aspect of it, but I think it also goes far beyond that, right? Because I think for the last decade or longer, there's been technologies that augment music, whether it's Pro Tools or you name it, right? And like, where do you see this going? How do you feel about technology, not just AI, but just technology in relation to creativity or music?
I think eventually AI will be able to generate any kind of creative work better than any human was ever capable of making. And it's already like, you can see how quickly things evolved with like Midjourney and these image generators. And it's going to video, it's going to audio next. It's already doing it. The pace of development is a little bit scary, but that's so sci-fi to me personally, and I've always been a big sci-fi fan as well, so I'm kind of intrigued by it. Even if it takes my job, I mean, I feel like it's still humans consuming, you know, the imagery, the audio, and I feel like humans are still, they want an emotional connection, they want a story to be told. Obviously AI can write pretty convincing and good stories already, but I'm hopeful that humans will want to hear and listen to stories and music made by other humans and from their perspective and understanding. And I feel like the intention and the storytelling will play a bigger role then. But eventually I feel like AI will be able to make anything creative in terms of music and images. I mean, AI is already making like Joe Rogan podcasts of like episodes that aren't there, that sound completely like plausible and real. But yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive. I'm pretty sure that.
Yeah, first it was the deep fake.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely interesting time to be alive. First it was the deep fake videos, now it's the deep fake conversations. I am a little bit, not a little bit, I am mostly optimistic about it, because I think at the end of the day, we want to consume art that we know is from, or 51% or higher from a human, right? I would assume that you're fans of yours, and I consider myself a fan of your work. We listen to your stuff because even though I don't know you personally, or fans don't know you personally, there's a connection there, right? There's a body of work, there's a catalog that if they listen to something that you made 5 years ago, there's a continuity, right? They come back because of Kupla. They know it's the same person or same entity that made it. That's the optimistic side of me talking. However, I guess that can also go away over time. Maybe there's something to be said for convenience, like we were talking about Spotify. Maybe the convenience is going to make it so that in the future I don't care how it's made, as long as it's convenient and I can access it and I can listen to it, or I can watch it if it's a movie. I don't know, but I'm still trying to be mostly optimistic.
Like, I'm sure there are a lot of people who might consume music purely as a as a means to do something else, and those kind of like, even like a lot of people use my music to study or sleep, and there's probably already companies that are making AI generated sleep and study music things, and that's completely fine. And I feel like when I think about like going to the gym and listening to some kind of like upbeat or like up tempo stuff, when you're not consciously listening to it, maybe, I mean, I might be wrong, but I feel like those are the areas where it'll show first. Whereas then going to a concert to see someone play live, that's a whole different experience. And at least for now, you can't replicate that with AI. But yeah, I mean, personally, at least, I mean, I will always be listening to. I'm interested in hearing what the AI can generate. I've yet to hear stuff that's really impressive to me, except for like the voice generation. So somebody did a Biggie Smalls track out of Nas track, the New York State of Mind. I don't know if you heard it. So they took Biggie Smalls, who died a long time ago, and then AI generated the Nas song in Biggie Smalls' voice. And that was quite impressive. Like I would be lying if I said that I wouldn't want to hear an album of that. But in terms of like music, like the musical background, the beat, the song behind it, I've yet to hear AI generated stuff that I'm like very impressed with. But the pace that it's going forward is like, if I'm saying I'm not impressed today, I might be impressed by the evening. So it's just it goes so quickly. I'm sure we'll see AI singularity. Previously, I'd say within our lifetimes, but I would say what would be kind of, I'd say it's going to happen very quickly. I mean, I don't work in that field. I don't, so it's hard for me to give an estimate. But just judging from the pace that the image generators went from basically non-existent into being absolutely stunning within just like a year and a half, it's right. Hard to predict what will happen because it grows so much quicker than humans do. But yeah, as you said as well, like I'm quite positive. Like I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I understand that there are risks involved, and you might need some kind of regulation, and you need to be very, very cautious about these things. But the undertone is still positive, so I'm sure that more good will come out of this.
So ending on a positive note, thank you, Kupla, so much for having the conversation with me today. It was really, really a lot of fun to learn more about you, to learn more about how you think about certain things, your process, and your journey. So the last question I want to ask you is, what is the best place for people to reach you or to find your work?
Well, first of all, thanks you so much for taking the time to do this. I know we've spoken a while now, and we finally found the time to do this. It's been a pleasure. It was nice to talk with you. Best place to find me and my music, obviously on Spotify, Kupla, on Apple Music, any kind of streaming platform. In order to reach me personally, Instagram is the best way. So Instagram/Kupla Sound, Kupla Sound. Instagram is the easiest way. Yeah, if you need to contact me personally, do it there. It's been a pleasure, really. I hope to see you again at a magic event somewhere in the world in the future.
I really hope so, especially given that COVID is the COVID situation is a lot better, at least in China. So I can travel again. I've actually crossed borders for the first time in 3 years recently. So I am really hopeful that we'll be able to play a game of Magic sometime. I'm really looking forward to it.
Cool.
Thank you for tuning in to Humans of Magic. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button below and leave a comment. That helps tell YouTube that you appreciate what I do and allows us to spread the word to other people. It goes a long way. It really does. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.